Welcome to this Would Be Better event. My name is Anna Holmberg. I represent the Swedish forest industries, and I will guide you through the next hour and 30 minutes. And I extend my welcome not only to you here at the Renaissance Hotel in Brussels, but also to all of you watching our live broadcasting. And as you know, today's topic is sustainable carbon cycles, with a special focus on the role for forests. And I am accompanied here on stage by Mia Crawford from the Federation of the Swedish Family Forest Owners. Good morning.
Good morning, and I'm very excited to be here today, and it's lovely to be able to finally meet and to have a live audience in front of us, as well as you watching us at home.
And what are your expectations for the discussion today?
Yes, this is actually my first Would Be Better in my new capacity, and I'm really looking forward to understand this topic and discuss it from different angles.
Could you please tell the audience and explain what the Would Be Better network is all about?
So Would Be Better is jointly organized by the Swedish forest industry and the Federation for Swedish Family Forest Owners. This is actually our 8th event, and each of these events are hosted by the 4 members of parliament, the Swedish members of parliament that you see on screen here. And today's event is hosted by Erik Bergqvist, whom you will soon meet. And the aim of the network is to be an arena for forest policy discussion and also knowledge sharing. And together, we want to increase the knowledge about the forest-based sector and its role in relevant EU policy making.
Thank you. So almost 300 have signed up for today, and you come actually from 25 different countries, mainly in Europe, but also outside of our continent. So thank you for spending part of your valuable time together with us today. If you are active on social media, please include hashtag #WouldBeBetter. And if you want to pose a question, you can do so by logging on to menti.com, using the code that you see in front of you. And don't worry, we will repeat that code several times during the event. So menti.com, and then enter the code. And this is the same procedure independently of whether you are here at the Renaissance or watching digitally. So also you sitting here in the room need to use Menti to pose your questions. And when you phrase the question, please respect the KISS principle, meaning keep it short and simple. And it is Mia who is mastering the inflow of questions, and we will do our very best to address a selection of them, depending on how many we get. We'll have to see. So thank you, Mia, and you will be back soon on stage.
Thank you.
So to today's topic, the European Commission has defined that Europe needs to develop more sustainable carbon cycles. But to make sure that we are all somewhat on the same page, let's start with a little bit of a recap. So the European Climate Law was politically agreed in 2021. It defines that greenhouse gas emissions and removals are balanced by the latest 2050. And it also defines that we have an aim to achieve negative emissions thereafter. And how is this to be done? Well, first of all, by drastically reducing our use of fossils and at the same time get a more circular economy. Secondly, by recycling carbon from waste streams, sustainable sources of biomass, or even directly from the atmosphere. And thirdly, by upscaling carbon removal solutions. And our focus today will primarily be on the middle part of this picture and the part on the right-hand side. And by that, I'm not saying that the part on the left-hand side is unimportant. On the contrary. But in that area, I would say that the European Commission has already put on the table a long line of legislative proposals, such as the revision of the LULUCF, the revision of the RED, or for instance, the Circular Economy Package #1. These 3 boxes, if you ask me, are not in isolation. They interact and are dependent on each other. For instance, if the if the way we upscale carbon removals would mean less availability of renewable resources, that could make it harder to decarbonize, for instance, in industry and energy, which primarily would be in the part on the left-hand side. If we drill down even further, we're talking about carbon farming. That might not be an expression that everyone is familiar with, but it's about business models that incentivize increased carbon sequestration in land management, for instance, agriculture and forestry. And it's also about industrial value chains to capture, recycle, transport, and store carbon. This could be, for instance, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, abbreviated BECCS, or as we often say, BECCS. So before we proceed, I'd just like to take this opportunity to sort out one thing that I personally feel is quite often mixed up a bit. But to do, thank you, there was the next slide. So I'd like to say a few words about the difference between carbon sink and carbon storage and the interaction between the two of them. So when trees grow, they absorb carbon dioxide, and when they are harvested, this is recorded as a carbon release. And if the absorption is bigger than the release, then the forest is a carbon sink. So we're talking, it has to be a net value to be a carbon sink. And carbon storage, on the other hand, is all the carbon stored in a forest at a given time, in the trees, in the soil, in the dead wood, to give a few examples. Could also be in the harvested wood products from the forest, as the ones you see on the screen. So a good carbon sink, year over year, will of course build a strong storage. If the sink declines for 1 year or several years, it will affect the storage level, of course, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the storage disappears. So with that being said, I think it is high time that we have a look at the opinion of the Swedish forest-based sector on today's topic. So have a look at this. I hope you enjoy that, and it's high time for me to say a very warm welcome to today's host, Erik Bergqvist. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and I must say you are so subtle, Anna. I also heard the expression KISS in the north, and then it was keep it simple, stupid.
Oh, well, I would never say that on stage.
No, of
Keep
course.
it short and simple. I used to have a manager who said to me, I don't want the long story, Anna. I want the keep it short and simple.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, well, that's a nicer way of putting it.
So I'm going to have to do your credentials here first, so
Okay.
everyone knows who you are, right?
Okay, oh, sorry.
So you're a member of European Parliament since 2019, and you belong to the S&D group, the Socialists and Democrats. You're a member of the Committee for Transport and Tourism and the Committee for Regional Development, and you're a substitute in the Committee for Industry, Research and Energy.
Yeah,
I got that right?
yeah, all the interesting committees. I would say.
Precisely. So I'm going to leave the floor to you for your opening address. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks for the opportunity to host this, which I both gladly and proudly do, because wood, forestry is important. It's an important part, it's a necessary part of the solution we see to the climate change right now. And for me, forest has always been, in a way, part of my life. When you're born in upper Sweden, in the inland, in the middle of the forest almost, and then people either were working in the mine or working in the forestry, except for the ones being nurses and working for the society. So it's been natural, but I have realized that it's not as natural for everyone. And for me, now when we look at the discussion, the really necessary discussion, and also decisions to fix the climate, to stop temperature from rising even more, I would say the most important thing that we do is to see through it that we use forest in the best possible way to actually mitigate the climate change. And the best possible way is, of course, to see that more trees are being grown and that the products and that even more products are being demanded. Because you know, I'll tell you a secret, the more people want forest products, the more trees that will be possible to grow. It's not harder than that, it's just actually as simple as that. And wood is an amazing material. Imagine a world without wood. Well, it's hard to imagine. Imagine this room without wood. I always thought that making a stick like this, which you see, how hard can it be? But I've tried quite many. One had a rubber handle, quite heavy. One had a plastic handle, quite slippery. One had a foam handle, quite sticky. And then suddenly realized, why don't we have a wooden handle? Perfect. Very nice texture, very light, very durable. So don't complicate things too much. See that we can use wood in quite many ways. And I will not be long. Thanks you again for being here. Thanks you again for watching. And I'm really looking forward to the interesting discussions and from the specialists that we will soon be here. Welcome here. Thank you.
And Eric will be back on stage at the end of the event to have a bit of a discussion with me, so he can sort of tell all of us what he heard being said on stage today. Good. Before I introduce our first speaker for his intervention, I'm just reminding you that you can pose questions by logging on to menti.com, and you will get the information here in a sec. I'm just looking at the control room. Yeah. Just give them a second. And one more, please. And one more. Never mind. You can post questions using menti.com. There we go. Yes. So don't hesitate to do that. We will bring in questions towards the end of the event, as I said. Our first speaker today is Mr. Christian Holzleitner. So please, give him a hand. You know, you don't have to be so subtle. Welcome, Christian.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
And now I'm going to do your credentials here. That's especially important for those watching the live broadcasting who can't sort of see you live. So you work at DG Klima, and I think most of you know, but I'm just going to explain to me, it's the Directorate General for Climate Action at the European Commission, where you are heading the unit for land economy and carbon removals. Fits like you're the hand in the glove for this topic, right? You are Mr. Carbon Removals.
At least I'm trying to do something there.
Ah, that's very good indeed. We are very eager to hear what you have to say on this topic, and especially what you can reveal about that upcoming piece of legislation in December, or Q4. So the stage is yours.
Okay, good morning. Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. Of course, very happy to be here. But Anna, I think I could reuse your slides that you had before, and you already said a lot of things, so let me provide my take on that. Our big aim is climate neutrality in 2050, as you've seen before. And this means after 2050, we shouldn't add any CO2 anymore to our atmosphere. And to reach that goal, we need in the first place to reduce significantly the use of fossil fuel, of fossil carbon. And as the last months, unfortunately, have shown, there are not only climate policy reasons to do this, but very important geopolitical reasons why we should get off our addiction to fossil carbon. But at the same time, we'll also need to take more CO2 already out of the atmosphere. So we need to store more CO2 in our forests, in our soils, also geologically, underground, and then also in the products. We need to also keep more CO2 in our furniture, in our bioplastic, in our fibers, and so on. And here we are directly into the discussion of sustainable carbon cycles. We need to do two things. The first one is we need to grow our biogenic carbon in a more sustainable way. This is what we call carbon farming. But we also need to use the biogenic carbon, the biomass, in a more sustainable way, in more long-lived products. We'll enter into a world where we'll still need carbon, but just that we don't have fossil one. So, and from where can we get it? It's either biogenic carbon, it's from waste streams, or we get it directly out from the air. So it will be a very valuable commodity. And we need to get better, not to use it so much anymore for energy, because we'll have a lot more of renewable energy, of solar and wind, or we need to move more into using it as a feedstock for industry, which also gives probably the higher profit margins. So it's about those two things that we are also working on, and our next milestone is this legislative framework that we want to come out with by the end of this year. So let me talk a little bit about carbon farming. So carbon farming is growing biomass food in a more sustainable way. So we should already, when producing biomass, when producing food, take in more carbon in the soils, in the forests. Make it more responsible. And there are a lot of good ideas around. Just think about the re-wetting of peatlands. And there are different ways of doing it. You could re-wet the peatland, set it aside, and maybe only use for the production of renewable energy with solar panels. But you could still do grow biomass on it, like with paludiculture. Or you use temporary re-wetting and still use a more intensive form of agriculture and forestry on there. So it's about finding this optimal mix. So what we are saying is not just like stop forestry agriculture, but find the right way, do it more sustainably. And there are a lot of good ideas and initiatives out there. And there are also a lot of ideas how that could be financed. So be it within the value chain, so consumers are ready to pay higher prices when they know this is a climate neutral value chain. And that's a very strong and I think attractive claim to say, okay, if I buy this product, it didn't have a negative effect on the climate, or maybe even a positive one. And I think this is something that consumers look for, but also investors. More and more investors are interested in having climate neutral or climate positive portfolios. And there, one of the first candidates is the bioeconomy. Then more and more member states are interested in financing carbon removals, be it through the common agricultural policy, be it for other forms of state aid. And then there's also this idea of a carbon market, so that you sell your additional storage of CO2 outside of your value chain, maybe to a third party that wants also to make a similar claim, like an airline to be climate neutral. And there we still need a lot more work to make this sustainable. But there are a lot of business opportunities out there, and a lot of ways how you can do that. And there's a vivid political discussion is, should we have a separate carbon removal target? How should we finance it? But whatever financing you will use, you need a good definition of what is a sustainable additional carbon removal. So you need to clarify, and you need to measure, you need to quantify how much carbon is stored for how long, with which environmental and climate effects. And this very basic thing of, you can call it a certification, you can call it monitoring and reporting, this is what we want to deliver by the end of this year. We want to come out with a framework that can create more trust in this. And that will be equally for what we call carbon farming, so forestry, agriculture. It will be for permanent storage, so bioenergy with CCS, direct air capture with CCS. It will be for product, because it's also important to see the benefits on, okay, how can I store more carbon for longer in products? And we'll look, I think, what is already around? What are the key quality criteria that you need to look at? It's the quantification method. We need to get more and better information also to the individual land managers. So we need to use much better remote sensing digital technologies. For soil carbon, we need to increase the accuracy of the monitoring. We need to be able to say, okay, what is additional? So to reward those that take an extra effort. So we need to identify those that go beyond the current regulatory and business practices. We need to be clear for how long carbon is stored. And then I think what people will also expect, what consumers, investors will say, will expect is, okay, who's liable to do this storage? Because there can be natural disturbances, carbon can be re-emitted, someone must be responsible for this, we must be very transparent about that. And then, of course, it's about the effects on biodiversity. Yeah? We look for these win-win solutions, good for the environment, good for biodiversity as well. So probably could call it environmental integrity. Do no significant harm to biodiversity and even do better. So we need some key performance indicators that show what you can do better. And I think there we should very much look for synergies with existing certification schemes. And then, of course, to make all of that credible, we need to talk about transparency, about the implementation. So we'll need to talk about third-party verification. We need to talk about a registry so that it's clear what happens with these financial claims that would come from the financing of the additional carbon removals. So that's about the criteria. And then, based on that, we'll need to develop precise methodologies. And as I said, there we would want to build as much as possible on existing best practices. So for this, we also want to set up an expert group where we can really discuss this with you and with all the other experts out there. As I said, getting in there remote sensing digital solutions, I think, will be so essential to be able to offer, on the one hand, a very accurate monitoring system, but which is also affordable and can really be accessible also to foresters, farmers with smaller holdings. So that's about where we want to go. And
interesting indeed. A few questions straight away. You mentioned additionality a couple of times. So is that a fundamental part of your thinking, that the carbon sequestration to be sort of credited in this system has to be additional to what, for instance, forest management otherwise would have achieved?
So I think that this is an information that stakeholders are very interested in. And I think with what we come now, and it's a first step, it's a first stepping stone. It's a voluntary scheme. It's a voluntary certification. It's like you could compare with what also privates are doing with sustainable forest management certification. And we just what we want to get in there is a better quantification of the carbon component. And I think it has a value that we kind of then say, okay, what are the best practices? And we need to be transparent about it, because probably also we all want to learn from each other. Okay, what can I really do on this parcel of land? What is the best thing from the view of bioeconomy, climate, and biodiversity? And we need to get that information to the land manager, because we need to get the action on the land.
Okay. Second question, you talked about products. I deliberately showed a picture before of what's called harvested wood products.
Yes.
But I mean, from the same tree that we produce the timber for construction, we also do pulp for textiles or packaging. Yes. So could we expect that those products would also be sort of recognized in this sort of certification?
So what we currently have under the LULUCF regulation at national level is this harvested wood product. And there you have, how is it called, this first decay function.
Yeah.
So you make a very rough guess for how long that carbon will be in there. So I guess that will be our starting point, and then we need to get better at quantifying that. And of course, then we also have to see, okay, in these products, it will not only be about biogenic carbon, it will be also about carbon that you get from waste streams or from direct air capture.
Okay. And are you on time with the work, or has this work been affected by the whole sort of geopolitical situation we have at the moment?
For the moment, we are on track. We are working towards having this legal framework by the end of the year, but it's a lot of work. So we still have to pass several internal procedures. And I think, as you said, it's a very uncertain world, and political priorities may shift over the next months. But like at the technical level, we are doing everything to be ready.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Christian. Give him a hand. He will be back for the discussion later. And instead, I welcome our next speaker on stage. So our next speaker is Ulrika Arnio. I hope I pronounced that. I'm half Finnish by birth, so I tried to sort of use that. You are Senior Policy Officer at Climate Action Network Europe.
Correct.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to your perspective on this topic.
It might be a bit different.
That's what we're hoping for. So stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation and a chance to bring Can Europe's view on this issue. My name is Ulrika Arnio. My organization is Climate Action Network Europe. Of NGOs and NGO networks. We have some 160 members, and we work on climate and energy policies in Europe, and we coordinate at the Secretariat NGOs' positions on these issues. And so let me start by saying that removals are absolutely critical in our efforts to stop and reverse climate change. So we're very happy to have this discussion. And so we, like Christine also said, we first need to take our emissions zero, but then we need to also remove, but this has to be in addition to the emission reductions. They cannot be instead of if we want to have an impact on the atmosphere. And the global carbon budget, that is compatible with 1.5 degrees. So this means how much carbon we can still pump in the atmosphere, because carbon, like you know, stays there, is practically gone. It will be gone in a few years. We still pump 40 billion tons annually. So the role of carbon removals, role of forests are only going to increase from here and to become more important, not only for climate, but for other reasons as well. So, but what is happening now, that the European sink should be increasing, it's actually decreasing. And just last week we learned that Finland, my country, very similar in a forest-wise, very forested country, our land sector has now become an emitter and is not a sink anymore. So this is quite drastic and radical when you look how much forest Finland has, and this is a bit of the trend that is happening across Europe. It's because of the harvesting levels are so incredibly high. It is the current LULUCF regulation that has and still further allows even from the current sink to go down. So luckily we are now, of course, like you know, we are revising the regulation at the moment. We're waiting for the parliament to vote wisely next week, and environment ministers also to decide that we want to finish the land degradation in Europe. So based on scientific estimates, what sustainable potential in Europe is, Europe has taken a position to call for a minus 600 million tons sink in 2030. This is quite drastic of what it is now, and this of course needs a big change how we use land across Europe. I have here a list of few ways that we also call win-win ways. The most important is reducing harvesting level to reasonable level. So reducing harvesting level, how much the forest intakes carbon is very directly linked to the levels of harvesting. We also advocate for different methods to harvest. So instead of clear cutting, moving to continuous cover forestry. We talk about agroecology, agroforestry, ecosystem restoration. This is the true win-win for everything, biodiversity, climate. We also support setting national targets for croplands and grasslands and wetlands. These sectors have very high potential to become from emitters to removers, but we think that they need their targets to policies to do that. And this all needs to, of course, to be facilitated by significant reduction of meat and dairy. And then my next point is that when we talk about land, carbon cannot be the only metric. So we need to increase the sink in a way that it also preserves and enhances biodiversity. The forest sector is fundamental not only for climate, but for our ecosystems, our environment, people, lifestyle, wildlife. So biodiversity and climate change, they are both driven by our economic activities, and they both reinforce each other. Climate is further exacerbated by ecosystem decline, and vice versa, biodiversity loss and ecosystems decline then cause further climate change. So this is the core finding that has been again confirmed in the latest IPCC report, that climate and biodiversity are kind of the two sides of the same coin, and they have to be tackled together. Land provides us everything we have, so it would be silly or kind of or even stupid to only give value land for the sequestration value it has. So this now really takes us then to the sustainable carbon cycles, the upcoming mechanism, carbon farming. There's still lots we don't know what is coming. We don't understand everything that has been said even, but we have a couple of concerns that I'd like to point out. So one of the most important one is that fossil carbon and biogenic carbon are not fungible, because biogenic carbon is not permanent. They operate with very different time scales. Biogenic carbon is very vulnerable intentional and unintentional reversals to fires, floods, droughts, pests, and climate change already increases these hazards and probably will so in the future. And a second point is that measuring and accounting and modeling emissions and removals in the land sector is very difficult. And we are still missing a lot of understanding how carbon cycles in the ecosystems operate. So two reasons, they are not permanent, and we also still have a lot of uncertainties. And to have a desired impact on the atmosphere, removals need to be additional to emission reductions. If they are done instead of at best, the result is a zero-sum game, but according to the latest IPCC report, it is not even so. It seems that the climate response from 1 ton of emissions is different to 1 ton of removal. So we cannot treat 1 ton as 1 ton when we talk about emissions and removals. So in summary, we don't think that land-based removals are suitable to be dealt with with the mechanism that only looks at carbon. And definitely we're not in favor of a mechanism that would allow continued emissions of fossil fuels and then offsetting this with the land-based removals. This would be short-sighted. It would be cheating with the atmosphere and even could drive towards false solutions like fast-growing monocultures, etc. And it would allowing offsetting now would just delay EU's decarbonization in general. With CAN, we have a very long-standing position against offsetting, whether it was then with the CDM or CDR. We think that the climate and ecological crisis at the moment is so severe that it requires that all sectors do their utmost, do their best without one undermining the other. So all removals, whether it's then nature-based or technology-based, need to be treated in a separate pillar or a sector, and there should be no flexibility with fossil emissions. And then the last words about the product substitution. Like like measuring fluxes in ecosystems, it's very difficult to estimate the net benefits of carbon stored in products. There's no international scientific consensus on this issue. And just quoting the Commission's own forest strategy, here it says that in the short to medium term, for example, until 2050, the potential additional benefits from harvested wood products and material substitution are unlikely to compensate for the reduction of the net forest sink associated with increased harvesting. In other words, long-lived wood products can have their value, but the increases in the long-lived ones need to then come from the short-lived ones. We must not increase harvesting to try to take the carbon into the products. We know, so the Commission knows that much, we know that much, that carbon is better in the forest than in the products. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rika. 2 questions on that. First of all, what you just said at the end, that carbon is better in the forest than in a product. But that would, at least in my thinking, mean that we would continue with plastics, with concrete, with steel, materials that actually create fairly big emissions when they are produced. Is that a better alternative?
That's not a better alternative, but I think that we need to, first of all, we need to reduce all that. Not everything that we have is necessary. And wood and forests and everything that we get from the nature, given the ecological crisis, biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, it is becoming very precious material, so we need to think very carefully where we put it. Many of the things that we now use and produce are quite unnecessary. So we're not against using wood. We of course understand that it has to be done, but it has to come from the paper and burning, etc. So there's still many unnecessary ways that we use wood.
Okay, I see. And my second question, you also seem to be in favor of carbon removals only being that we should only count the ones that are additional.
Yes.
And what's your sort of explanation of additional?
So what I said also that we don't think that that nature-based or biogenic carbon is suitable for this mechanism altogether. So
Altogether?
Altogether. Counting is complicated, but we can have that exercise, but we already now know what is good for forest, for climate and biodiversity. So we don't necessarily need to wait for these complicated calculations to be done with that might in the end be even wrong. So baselines are difficult to set. So all these things are, when it's about ecosystems and biogenic carbon, it's very difficult to estimate. So we should start doing the good things already now, find ways to restore ecosystems, to good forest management, etc. But the carbon removal mechanism is not the prerequisite for this.
Thank you. We'll come back to this in the moderated discussion. So thank you, Ulrika.
Thank you.
Give her a hand. And then I welcome our third and last speaker up on stage, Mr. Hans Djurberg. Welcome.
Thank you.
And now I have to do your credentials as well.
Thank you.
So you are Director of Sustainability at SCA.
That's correct.
And SCA is Europe's largest private forest owner,
That's also correct.
but you also have large industrial activities producing, and I'm going to do this right, pulp, packaging material, wood products, and renewable energy.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Good. So the floor is yours for the perspective of a forest owner and a forest industry actor.
Thank you. That's good. And yes, I shall not be long. I will provide more of maybe some background to a forest owner's view. And I will be representing, of course, SCA as a company, but I think more broadly than that, I will represent also many other forest owners in the Nordic region. And I think there will be quite a lot of contrast maybe and some tensions potentially with what Ulrika said, and that's great. Yeah. That's why we're here to discuss these things thoroughly and so forth. So to start off, I want to use this picture. It comes from my company, where we explain the way we look at the role of the forest in contributing to a fossil-free society and mitigating climate change. And of course, as already been said by Anna and others, we look at the forest in three ways when it comes to climate and climate mitigation. First, and maybe most obvious, is that the forest itself, it absorbs carbon. And our forest is big, so it does this also in a big way. The net absorption in our forest is 5.4 million tons of carbon every year. And then we produce a lot of products based on these forests, and we try to maximize the value creation out of every tree we harvest. So whatever can be used to produce saw logs and sawn goods and long-lived products is used for that purpose in our sawmills. But the bark, the sawdust, is also put to the best use possible. The bark is used to heat the dryers and produce energy in our sawmills. The sawdust and the shavings, they go either to energy production and also to, of course, important raw material for our pulp mills. In our pulp mills, there are also residue streams that are used either as internal energy creation or external. We are investing currently in biorefineries to use some of the residue streams to produce bio-based and bio-based fluid energy. So liquid fuels. And I mentioned this because it is important, and then we can of course discuss how do you calculate this and what are the uncertainties, etc. But it is incredibly important to keep this holistic view of the forest, remembering there's both the role of the forest itself and the products we produce based on the forest. In addition, of course, to make this equation complete, you also have in the lower part there our emissions. And we carefully calculate our fossil emissions as a company and present those, and you find the number here, it's 0.7 million tons of fossil carbon. Our production is almost fossil-free. This mainly relates to the transportation, because this number includes the transportation all the way to the customer gate. So we include all our transportation, both of the raw material and the finished product. Next slide, please. And this is just to put it in more of a, I guess, schematic context. But again, there's the change in the forest, the net absorption. There's the displacement or substitution of fossil emissions using bio-based, wood-based products. And then from that, we need to reduce it by the fossil emissions in our value chain. And this for us, and I would say for Nordic forest owners, this is then represents the total climate effect. Really no surprise here, but I think it's good as a background and maybe putting some numbers on that. More importantly, I'd like to put some even bigger numbers on this to look at, well, how does this work then? But first of all, one of my favorite pictures. Next slide, please. Because I think this picture really well sums up this holistic view on the forest, where we see the forest itself with the forest carbon and the forest being in net sink. We see the harvesting in order to create the wood-based products. We see the storage of of carbon in our products, and we can also see how that carbon is then recycled, both in terms of products being recyclable and recycled, and also the carbon itself being recycled through the atmosphere. And most importantly in this picture, the focus must be on reducing our dependency and our use of fossil materials and fossil energy. And we could also augment the effect of this by, next slide please, by adding on the carbon and capture technologies for both usage and storage. They follow the same pattern, but they could be an additional augmenting factor to this. And then to get back to those bigger numbers. So does this work? Does it really work what we're saying about using the forest at the same time as it keeps being a net sink for carbon? Next slide, please. Here you can see actually data for the past 30 years over the Swedish forest. And you could show the same numbers for the forest in my company. Here you can clearly see that the forest is growing, but we are also harvesting more and more over this 30-year period. If you look at the slide or the graph on the right-hand side, you can see the green line. It represents the standing timber volume in the forests in Sweden. And the gray line underneath, it represents the harvesting for each year in, of course, the same forests. And here you can see that both are quite significantly increasing over these 30 years. Looking at the bottom hand graph, you can see the accumulated harvest over the same time period. And you can also see in green how the standing volume is actually increasing, and thereby the carbon storage in those forests. So the climate effect then, looking at our forests and the way I've shown how we calculate it, you can actually see that the climate impact from our forest has been increasing by 1 million tons per year over the past 30 years. And that is, I think, something you cannot simply disregard. You simply need to take that into as a fact and try to understand how can we build on that and use that going forward. Because forests and forest products and active, sustainable forest management has a fundamental role to play in climate. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hans. Two quick questions before I let you off the hook.
Yep.
So, based on the amount of wood that you harvest, how much of that wood turns into what people here in Brussels calls long-lived products? Do you have a rough number, or perhaps even a precise number?
I think I have a fairly precise number. So, first of all, it's in our interest, like I already said, to create the maximum value for each tree harvest. It's actually our sustainability idea and sort of our mission. So we want to produce currently as much solid wood as we can, because that's the highest value. For a forest owner, looking at their forest, about 70% and maybe even more of the value in the forest is represented by the solid wood, or the bottom log in the forest. So it's incredibly important. But when you look at our forest and the tree we harvest, maybe half of it goes into sawlogs, a little bit more of the volume, but let's say half. And when we make solid wood products out of that, 90% of our solid wood goes into long-lived products from our production in our
So you said that half of the harvested wood goes into sawmills, and then you get 90% out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to keep it simple. Yeah.
So do you have innovation projects ongoing to be able to do even more long-lived products, or?
Yeah, like I said, that's always that's built into our business model, that we want to create that value, and we are looking at ways to use wood that would maybe currently be used for pulp, to use that to produce sawn goods instead, because that represents a higher value. We're also looking at and considering using the shavings to create long-lived products. So again, looking at board materials, etc., that could be used for construction rather than putting into pulp. Again, if that is of a higher value for us. So.
And concerning this displacement effect, we heard Ulrika say before that perhaps there's not enough scientific basis to calculate the climate benefit. You as a company, you were quite early trying to calculate the displacement effect.
Yeah.
what would you say? Is it scientifically, is it based on a sound scientific basis, or what's your view on that?
I think we use the same models. We've been very, very careful, and this is all transparent on our website. We've been very careful and particular about using established methods, so represented by the IPCC foremost. So we use, wherever possible, we use that data. And of course, our calculations are also, I would say, very conservative in terms of measuring the climate impact for the substitution effect or the displacement effect. And it's all visible and transparent on our website, so anyone can go look and see how we calculate and what numbers we use.
But over time, that displacement effect would at least theoretically go down to zero, because we're going to remove the fossil resources that we use in society. Yes.
And I mean, we look at, and that's a very good point. I mean, we look at this not as sort of the end game. We look at this as a way to transform, because we want to transform the economy to a bio-based economy. And none of this will be relevant, and we can start talking in other ways. But now, as we transform both mentally and physically what we do, I think these models are important to shift our thinking, to really start act. And I would say it took a few years for us as a company also to really start to adjust our strategies and our business plans to really reflect this thinking. These things take time, and we need models. We need to understand this to turn strategy into action.
Well, thank you, Hans.
Thank you.
And you're going to stay on stage.
Okay.
Because now we're going to ask Christian and Ulrika to return on stage. We're going to do a bit of a moderated discussion. So you're going to have to share this table, because I'm occupying this. So make space.
Go on here.
And before we kick off, one final input, that don't forget menti.com, post questions. Mia is doing thumbs up down here. She's preparing the ones that we're going to bring forward here very soon. So I have prepared a couple of topics that we're going to discuss. And the panelists, they know about the topics, but they don't know about the specific questions. So I'll do it this way, that for each topic, I'll start by making an argument. And then you can agree or disagree in whatever way you want. So my first argument is that the really, really, really important thing here is to keep the pressure up on reducing fossils, so that we don't end up in a discussion where we lose that perspective and instead sort of have a very strong perspective on carbon removals. So I say, let's make it harder and more expensive to use fossils. Let's put more effort into a more circular and, I think, bio-based economy, and then make sure to close all those loopholes that might exist. So Christian, you're going to go first on this one. So how are you politically going to achieve this?
I think we've been very clear in the climate law, or the Union has been very clear in establishing the 2030 target of at least 55% net reduction. But to that, you can only count 225 million tons of removals. So a very clear signal that the first thing we need to do is to reduce the emissions. But this shouldn't stop us in any way of also setting good incentives for increasing removals. We must do both, but I think this is a good example how the Union set the 2030 targets, how to balance those two objectives.
Okay. And Ulrika, would you agree on this argumentation, or do you see a risk for loopholes?
I see. We always see. I think it is great that there is this limit. We think that the limit should have been, of course, zero, but it's very important that there's a limit, so that if we increase our sink, then the pressure doesn't, so that the emission reductions still need to happen. So we call this mitigation deterrence, and this is what might happen, what you just described, that this is a big concern for NGOs even to talk about removals, because they will never be able to compensate on if we keep on emitting like we do. So we are a bit cautious that if we try to talk about it, what happens then to our main topic, that is to reduce emissions. So this is very important to us, and we looked at a lot of there's more and more research also coming out of this, and the conclusion is, one after the other, the studies come to the conclusion that that we need separate targets for emission reductions and we need separate targets for removals, and there should be no fungibility between. So ideally, there could be even targets for, sub-targets for nature-based solutions and then technology-based solutions.
So you will definitely be the watchdog, watching out for no loopholes. And Hans, you have huge forest holdings. So do you see a potential risk here that you would be the sort of lung for fossil emissions elsewhere in the Union, that the fossil emitters would sort of get away as long as you make your forests grow and you'll sort of make sure they end up at zero?
Yeah, actually, I do. I mean, looking at a lot of the discourse, that is an obvious risk. And I think it's incredibly important that we always keep the fossil emissions in focus and reducing our, like I already said, our dependency and the real emissions, keeping them down and reducing them to zero. Having said that, I think in order to do that, you really need to take a holistic view on the forest again. You need to consider both the uptake in the forest and the role of the products, because otherwise, I think we will not reach that end goal of simply reducing the fossil emissions, because the products are so critical. So we need that holistic view of the forest. And yes, maybe we need different targets, but when you look at the forest, you need to take the whole picture into consideration. The picture I showed earlier with the net sink in the forest and the products at the same time. Otherwise, what measures we take may be even counterproductive. If we were to disregard the so-called displacement effect, I think actions would actually turn out to be counterproductive for the climate.
So Christian, you're ending up in a situation, you have a watchdog for the loopholes, and you have another watchdog to make sure that large forests, so I don't envy you on that, but it seems that we have an agreement here that reducing fossil emissions has to be, number one and sort of at the center of attention. Next topic, carbon farming. So what carbon farming, what carbon farming practices should be promoted? Because there's different ways of doing carbon farming. So I say that when it comes to forests, I apologize, but I'm not bringing agricultural forward today. I stay with forests. So in relation to forests, carbon farming should do two things, and here I'm with Hans. It should increase sequestration, and we should have this focus on replacing fossil-based products. So Hans, I think that you've sort of already expressed your view on this quite clearly, but you're also a big forest owner. Why could you not benefit more from, just getting awarded for the sequestration you do? I mean, couldn't that be good for your business?
I mean, it could. And then for our business, again, SCA is first and foremost a forest owner. Our biggest asset is the forest. And the value we create in and from the forest is what we are concerned about. So if you were to take a very narrow view again and you look at only the forest and the value created there, yeah, maybe you could do that. But I stated again, it would, at least in the short term, be counterproductive if we disregard the active forest management, where you also have as output products that would replace fossil-based materials and products. So I think rather than looking at the forest like that, you need to look at it as this machine again that can do both. That can actually both serve as a net sink, also serve as a carbon storage, but also give us output all these valuable, recyclable, and not least biodegradable products out on the market. So I think that's very important, and I also think that these systems should incentivize that, sustainable, active forest management.
So Ulrika, you mentioned before that, or you seem to say, tell me if I put words in your mouth, because that's not my intention, you seem to be quite comfortable with sort of long-lived products from wood.
More comfortable, definitely.
Yeah. But as I said earlier, what about those other products that we need in society? Where are they going to come from if we don't use the alternative that they're based on wood?
So we will need to use bio-based materials for that. That's for sure. But the question for us is that do we need to count them as carbon removals? They are not long-lived. If the storage is not permanent, then removal has not happened. So there are other reasons and other benefits for doing that, but it's not the carbon removal capacity that these products have. So that's a big question mark still for us, what is going to happen. There's a lot that we don't understand with the carbon farming proposal. Commission talks about voluntary carbon markets to finance carbon farming. What does that mean? How will we then count this so that we avoid double counting towards national inventories, and are we allowing fossil emissions to continue instead of doing carbon farming? So these are still, maybe Christian will give us some light today, maybe.
Yes, can you bring some light on this, Christian?
Yes, definitely.
Please.
As I said before, what we want to achieve with that proposal is to bring, in the first place, more transparency, more trust. And there's still some confusion. Is paper a carbon removal? I would say no.
Could I, excuse me for interrupting, well, what about if we use pulp to produce textiles? Would that be carbon removal? I'm just sort of trying to understand
So,
a bit
like for example, if we go into this more technical discussion, so IPCC, for example, talks about, I think, really long-lived products, maybe of 100 years, when they talk about carbon removal in products. But where I want to put the focus with this proposal is really in, as I said before, we need to get better at quantifying how much additional carbon, for how long, how sustainable. And at that we need to get better at quantifying that. And that will be the basis for any financial incentive. And this is my personal view. I think that a lot of financial incentives should and probably will come within the value chain. So what you are doing. As I say, I think that consumers as well as investors, they will want to see that the value chain is climate neutral or climate positive. And there we can build on existing contractual relationships and everything and make it better. Then there's the idea of the carbon markets, which is often quite a toxic debate. And there we may deliver like a little stepping stone in that. We get clearer on what is a good carbon removal. But this will not solve the problem of the voluntary carbon markets. This is a wild, wild west out there. And it's a global market, so it's not something that probably we as Commission can regulate, and I don't know whether we want to do this. But there is a certain potential for it. But on this, our colleagues in the Director General for financial markets, they are looking also at sustainability reporting and so on. So there are steps we are taking to bring more clarity into this. But I think what we also want to be very clear on our side with our proposal is it's a difference whether you store something geologically. You have the rules of the Carbon Capture and Storage Directive. It's very clear the carbon will stay there for many, many, many years. And you have a clear liability on this. When we talk about natural processes, that's something completely different. And I think the jury is still out there for what will be then there, the optimal financing mechanism. And as I said, we are looking at, we are seeing different things. We see financing within the value chain. We see public financing. We see this idea of carbon markets. But the proposal that we will be coming out by the end of this year will not be about this choice, because then we talk about, okay, will we have separate carbon removal targets and so on. And I think there we talk very much about our post-2030 policy. And this will be for the next Commission. And as I said before, for the period up to 2030, we've been very clear, or the climate law is very clear about the role of removals, and we don't intend to change this.
Oh, well, at least for me, there were a few clarifications in that. Thank you. Next topic, carbon farming and the relation to biodiversity. You raised it in your intervention before. I mean, we know that biodiversity and climate change are two very important societal challenges. But I will stick my neck out a bit here, and I would say that they do not necessarily benefit from the same solutions. So I would say that I could favor carbon farming practices would not include effects on biodiversity. So let's see what you have to say on that. And you go first, Ulrika, since you...
I think you'd be so wrong if you wouldn't care.
We want to have a bit of a debate here.
The biodiversity crisis will hit us as hard as climate as well. So that would be short-sighted from your side. I think that we need to find solutions that both are tackled together.
So carbon farming could only be about those practices that address both at the same time?
We cannot look at one single thing when it comes to land. There are other nitrogen. I'm not also expert on the land emissions, but there are many issues with the ecosystems. And then considering that land gives us everything we have, then we cannot just be looking at the carbon. So yes.
And Hans, would you agree or disagree on this?
I'm not sure if I agree
you
or disagree.
represent 2.6 million hectares.
No, but what's very clear to us is that both challenges are absolutely critical to society, and they are both extremely relevant to land use and forest management. But I do agree that with you, I think more in one sense, and that is that I don't think the actions are necessarily the same. There are cases in which they are. I mean, set-asides, for example, are important for biodiversity, to have natural processes ongoing in large and small forests. So that's very important. But when you look at the climate benefit in that, it is diminishing over time, because with time, those forests will either burn or they will rot, and the carbon will be released. And I believe that in order to solve the biodiversity challenge in forestry, you need that as one measure, but you also need other measures that are not linked to the climate sort of solution, but they have their own merits. They are important in their own right. So I cannot put them all together. You need to look at them separately. You need to find the synergies, but you also need to be aware of the trade-offs and manage those over time. So that's, I think, is my position.
So how are you going to balance this from the Commission's perspective?
Well, I think we should first look, what I said before, for the win-win solutions. I think there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. Rewetting of peatlands. I said low-hanging fruit, it can be quite a challenge, quite a challenge to implement it, because it often may also involve like really changing the regional economy. But I think this is something what is good for where you see the climate benefits and the biodiversity benefits. And on this, we need to work. And I think what also our certification proposal should be about, bringing those win-win solutions to the front. It's in the end also a voluntary scheme. So, and I think also for a land manager, particularly if we then go also for smaller land managers, they cannot have like 5 different schemes. They need one comprehensive regulation where we need to see, okay, where do we find this sweet spot, as I said before, climate, biodiversity, bioeconomy. We need to bring this together. And I'm not saying this is an easy one. It's about really an optimization exercise. And again, what we hope is first, and we need to get better in understanding, in being more transparent, what are good practices, what could be done. And I also fully agree that we are not yet there, and there's a lot to be done, in particular for soil carbon, where we need to get better. But I think, as you also said, there are certain measures we understand that can be done, and that we want then to quantify. But it's definitely a first step.
Short comment,
Yeah, very
waiting
short,
there.
because I want to agree with Ulrika as well, because the global challenge of biodiversity and climate are linked in one very important aspect that we seldom talk about here, is the global deforestation, especially in the tropics, and this has to stop. And here, of course, climate and biodiversity concerns, they are absolutely overlapping. and it's 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions as well. So I'd like to state that as well. We sometimes get stuck in our own realities.
And we could very well come back with a later would be better event, which is focusing more on that topic. But moving on to talk a bit about BECCS, so make sure everyone is on the same page, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. I should say that this should be prioritized, incentivized. In the Swedish forest industries, we have many pulp mills that could be potential BECCS sites. But it has to work technically, it has to be economically viable, and it has to be voluntary. So let's hear what you guys have to say about this. And I think I'll send it over to you first again, Hans, because you operate these pulp mills where you could actually do it. So is this something you have in pipeline?
Actually, it is. We are looking carefully at this currently, and like I already said, it could be a very strong way to augment our ability to remove more carbon, but also to recycle more carbon, and by that also reduce our dependency on fossils and reduce the fossil emissions.
But,
so very,
what
very important.
What do you need to make it happen?
I think we need the sort of both incentives and the frameworks and the preconditions, both politically and financially, to do so. I mean, these are very big investments, and if some of the plants we are looking at, for example, to use the carbon to produce liquid biofuel with the help of hydrogen, these are very big investments, and we really need the right preconditions to do so. If those are in place, we would be very interested and very willing to do so. We have the necessary preconditions in big emissions from biogenic carbons in our pulp mills, and we could definitely make better use of that.
So Christian, could he expect such incentives coming his way soon, or?
As you've also seen in our communication sustainable carbon cycles, we are very keen to explore this, and we are currently financing the biggest BECCS project in Stockholm, the district heating plant, or that's run on biomass, and where the idea is to take out the CO2 of the waste streams and then store it under the North Sea. And we have several of projects related to carbon capture and storage in the Innovation Fund. So we would be very interested to see, okay, how could such a business model work around the North Sea? So you would have several capture facilities. You would have several facilities that would then use the CO2, and finally also to store it. And of course, this must be done sustainably. You also need a lot of energy for that. Where does it come? How can it make sense? I mean, we've put a lot of money in the Stockholm BECCS. I would also be very interested to see, okay, how could a public-private partnership on that work? How could also the private sector chip in more to finance this? But I would expect with the Innovation Fund, where we also now propose within Repower EU to launch this autumn a new call with 3 billion euros of a volume, to see more of those projects, and as I said, to really see climate positive value chain, but of course, which is very sustainable, which is about the sourcing of the biomass that is burned there, and of course, that's also then I think a concern. Now coming back to our certification, how do we show that ensure that this is done in a very sustainable way?
So where do you stand, Ulrika, on BECCS?
It's not probably a surprise that I don't think you have ever met an NGO to be very enthusiastic about BECCS. I don't work on BECCS that much, but I know that many of our members do, and there's a lot of skepticism if you count all the life cycle emissions, about the land use.
And what is the skepticism about?
If you count all the life cycle emissions associated, will there be additional benefit? That is a big question mark of those who know more than I do. I don't. Yeah. And there's concerns about the land use change impacts, water use, etc. But But in general, isn't the burning wood a bit old-fashioned already? It isn't a bit passé.
Un peu passé, huh? Well, very shortly, Hans.
I just want to remind us, if we look at a pulp mill and the biogenic emissions there, they all come from again, residue streams. We are not burning roundwood in order to heat or create energy in any way in a pulp mill like that. And furthermore, the energy we would use would come, in our case, from windmills on our own land to simply make it, I guess, the double or triple green in that sense.
Okay, good, thank you. Let's check in with Mia.
Yes.
Have we had any questions flowing in?
Yes, we have. Thank you so much to everyone who's been sending in questions. And
In the best of worlds, pick one. We're going to pick three.
Pick
and
three,
then address
okay.
them to one of the speakers.
Okay, well.
And the other
then-
ones might get a chance to comment. It depends on how we do on time.
Okay. There's so many interesting questions that have come in, but maybe I start then with a question to you, Christian, because forestry, we're dealing with a long time frame, and so a question that has come in is asking you about how long time frames would be established for the forest carbon in this upcoming scheme. Is it 50 years or others? What would then really be the long-term commitment for forest owners, private forest owners, to ensure this carbon if it's such a long-term commitment?
That's a very interesting question, yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Easy to answer, right?
That's a very important one, because this is about the ones who want to finance carbon removals, or want to finance a more sustainable forest management, are very much interested. Okay, for how long is this commitment? For how long can I be sure that this carbon is removed from the atmosphere? In particular, compared to other storage solutions that are more permanent as geological storage. So first, I think it's very important to be honest about it. For how long? So there should be a certain minimum duration on that, and that will also influence then probably that the financing the support that you can get from that, be it from public or private sources, and of course, the longer you commit, I think the more financing you can get for that. But I think there must be, and there are different ways of how it's currently already done. You can have certain financial guarantees. You can have a minimum. Okay, you could say, okay, I do it for 20 years, and then I prolong it. But of course, if I stop that practice, the benefit, the claim from that is lost, and we should be very honest about it. It's something different if I just say, yes, I'll do that forest management to keep it like 2 years longer or something, or delay the harvest, and then I need some credible commitment to that, because you have to compare it to someone who stores carbon geologically for thousands of years. We need to have both, but we need to be very transparent on what is the benefit to the atmosphere and for how long this is guaranteed.
And can you make such a commitment as forest owner?
I think not all of forest owners would be able to. I think that's just comes with the nature of it. But I also think, you have a point. There needs to be clarity and honesty about such a commitment. That's absolutely fundamental for the trust in a system like this. And of course, SCA is a long-term forest owner, and we would be ready to make such commitments. But this varies between forest owners, I'd say.
It depends on whether you have small, Rika?
Yes, I have been very negative about the permanence of biogenic carbon, but of course, there are so many additional benefits when we do good forest restoration and we keep forest up and do proper forest management that maintains the biodiversity. So So if we only look at the carbon and the permanence, that's maybe then not beneficial compared to direct air capture that has no additional benefits.
Yeah.
So these are very different, and there's much more value than just the carbon. So we would need to look at also all the other
Precisely,
benefits
yeah.
that
It's
we
not
get
apples
from
and
the
apples, it's
from
apples
the
and-
nature. There's so many
I see what
additional
you mean.
benefits. What is a benefit? Is it biodiversity is the side benefit, or is carbon maybe? Maybe even we could think of that.
Good
Can,
point.
can I very much agree on this? So it's about for how long do you commit to carry out a certain management practice? And that has more benefits. What we are particularly concerned about is, okay, how can you quantify the carbon benefit out of it? But ideally, this goes into one comprehensive reward or financial incentive for the land manager to carry out a management practice that is good for climate, for biodiversity, and makes economic sense.
The magic management routine, yeah.
But I think it's
No,
it's not so magic. No?
Yes.
I agree with you.
Let's throw in another question here.
Yes, maybe kind of linking to what you're discussing already. Hans, you have a long experience of being involved in the Forest Stewardship Council, and I just wanted to hear maybe what are some key lessons learned from the FSC certification that you would like to bring forward here if we're not talking about a broader certification schemes, because these schemes already exist out there.
Yeah, I think it ties nicely to what Christian just said. Both FSC and PFC, but they already include these effects of forest management. So, as I already said, the carbon sequestration itself, the growth of the forest, so have a healthy, resilient forest. You have you manage biodiversity, and also you have the output of the products. And in addition, of course, you have all the social impact from forest management. So all of that, I think, is extremely important, that you bring all these things together in a system like that. And both FSC already has mechanisms to deal with that. You can, under this FSC scheme, you can make claims around carbon, or you can make claims around water or biodiversity, and you can have those verified as part of the overall verification of your FSC certification. It's already included in what FSC calls the principles and criteria. PFC is also working on similar ways to better understand and calculate the climate impact from the standards that are applied. And I mean, we often forget the fundamental role of certification in actually improving forest management, and improving forest management in all three dimensions: social, environmental, and economic. And with that comes climate impact, climate improvements, and also other effects. Whatever you put first, I think it will come back to the forest owner and land manager. What do I put first? But all of those, I think, benefits, they come with sustainable, responsible forest management. So that would be my comment.
Okay.
And I think the FSC system and other systems for certification has the benefit of also bringing global challenges to the local and national level by having a platform for dialogue to really discuss and set the standards that are relevant at the national level. Very, very important to make these systems work and deliver what we expect from them.
And the time lady says that a final quick question.
Yes, well,
Then we're going to bring up the host on the stage.
Yes, I have a final question to Christian, but before that, I also want to bring forward that there is a comment from Indementi about the figures that you mentioned, Ulrika, from Finland, that there is these land use sector are estimates and are not really official results. So I think it's important to have that stated, and that Finnish forests are still considered as remarkable carbon sinks. Also in the future.
Yes, it's the forests still are, but the other land sectors are. So there's apparently a 2 million ton now. These numbers will be confirmed, but they were reported last week.
Right. So my final question then is, if we've heard that there are already these certification schemes, there are already market-based solutions out there, why do we need new initiatives from the Commission?
To create more trust in those schemes and to have a better method and to have a European-wide standard for that.
But will your proposal build on the good parts of what's already existing, or will it sort of be defined in parallel?
No, of course. I mean, there are good, there are bad initiatives out there. There is the risk of greenwashing.
Yeah.
And I think where we, and what we are, I think, good at the Commission is at setting standards and then creating the trust on data. And of course, what we need for this to be successful is we need to have all stakeholders around the table, to have all views there, and then to come up with a methodology based on what is already out there, to which we, of course, hope that many of the stakeholders can agree. Because I think what is very much needed also in particular in the bioeconomy, if you want to make the claim that you have a climate neutral value chain, and I think that's such an important claim. This must be verified, must build on trusted principles that are accepted among all stakeholders. And to this, we hope that we can contribute something.
Okay, good. Well, that was the final word. So we're going to say thank you to the panelists with a round of hands. And thank you. And then we're going to ask our host, Erik Bergqvist, to come back on stage. Thank you, Mia. By the way, I didn't intentionally turn my back on you. Welcome back, Erik.
Thank you very much.
You've been down there in the audience listening to the discussion. So
Yep.
tell me, what have you heard?
I'm an optimist and I try to see possibilities. I think I heard a lot of good things. One thing that from Christian was that he said we have to create business opportunities. And I think that's one of the keys to this, that we have to let the industry, the forestry managers, release the innovation that I know is going on, but to try to enhance this innovation even more and to see how can we, with business solutions, how can we help business solutions that will create both carbon sink, but also create the complements to fossil fuels, how we use the forestry products.
But can I if I read between the lines, can I hear a bit of a criticism versus the Commission in relation to this? Or?
You could interpret it as that as well. But also I would say, and that has to do a little with the discussion you had on loopholes, because of course we shouldn't have loopholes, but in a world that is not perfect, there will always be loopholes. And in trying to take away all the loopholes, my experience from the Parliament and also from the Commission is that we get on a so detailed level that it's almost impossible sometimes to do business in this area or to even to follow the rules. It gets so complicated and detailed. So I think we should more embrace the fact that 99% of people in the industries, they want to follow the rules. They want to do the right thing. And then we should create our laws from that and realize there will be loopholes. And when we find the big ones, then we will fill them. But we can't solve it from the beginning because then it will be impossible to use these kind of laws.
So I also almost hear you say to the Commission, do a little bit less of micromanagement and a little bit more of painting with a big brush?
Yeah.
Or did I put too many words in your mouth?
No, and that's my point. Let the companies do the micromanagement. We put up the big framework. We say this is what we expect from you when it comes to climate, when it comes to biodiversity. Then how you solve it, it's not our expertise, that's your expertise.
And do you believe that that will also be the generic thinking in your S&D party group when you discuss this in Parliament?
No.
And why is that?
Well, we have very different opinion on it, but I would say it's quite a Nordic perspective on how to do both politics and industrial management.
Okay. Do you have
I would say it's quite successful as well.
Well, I'm Nordic, so I'm not arguing with you, but your final word to the audience here today, what would that be?
Well, there is a lot to do. Forestry is important, and of course the forestry sector can improve. But I would say keep up innovation, keep up the good work, but also, and I think that has been the case today, be open to both criticism and how we can improve. But basically, forestry is important for the climate change, can do even more, but then we have to release innovation even more in that sector.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. And thank you to all of you who have participated today. As always, as organizers for the Would Be Better, we hope that you found the discussions interesting and that we managed to give you 1 or 2 new thoughts that you can take with you. But before you take off, have a look at how wood is used in a resource-efficient manner, at least in Sweden. Thank you. Tack så mycket, Erik. Ska jag åka be honom?